writing a screenplay is like punching your way out of your own coffin. I looked that up and tried to make sure, did anyone else write that? And I can't find any attribution to it anywhere. So I guess I'm the first person to say that. I don't know if I really am, but I couldn't find it cited anywhere. And I thought it must be commonplace because that's what it feels like. When I'm trying to write a script, when I'm breaking the story, when I'm making notes, when I'm trying to come up with ideas for scenes, with different ways characters will reflect on a central idea in the story, with the way an ally will attack the main character, with what the antagonist plan is, it feels like I'm entombed in this coffin. I'm struggling for oxygen. I've only got a little bit of wiggle room, like this much, and I've got to do these 1-inch punches like in Kill Bill, Volume 2, and punch my way out of my own coffin, painfully, slowly, making tiny little dents, and gradually, after much progress and much pain, you're going to see the shape of this story. And even then, it's going to look like hell the first time. You're going to have to go back in there with a contracting crew and clean it up. And anyways, point of the metaphor is, I was feeling that today. I'm just wondering, do other writers experience that? I was at a writers group meeting a couple of weeks ago, and I asked around, like, does anyone here ever, do you feel horrible when you're writing? And do you just worry your brain's not going to work? And I didn't ask many people that, but they were like, no, not really. I was like, oh, okay, well then, never mind. But that's what it feels like. I'm kind of, now I'm not as afraid, but especially when I started out, it was so excruciating. I was clenching my teeth so much, going through, not only struggling with my first script, which was bad, but it was important. You got to go through a bad script or scripts. I'm still going through them. And I was clenching my teeth so much, grinding my teeth. I started getting tinnitus, like a humming in my ears, ringing, which I still have a little bit of. But I was worried I was having hearing damage. So I went to an ear doctor and he said, well, are you having hearing loss? I said, no. He said, do you grind your teeth a lot? I said, yes. He said, well, you have TMJ, which is like when you clench your teeth too much and your jaw is kind of misaligned and it can affect your ears. And by the way, you can do some like facial massages for that. Like you rub your cheeks like under your cheekbones, I think, this way, go up and then up at your temples here. Supposedly it helps. At first it really stopped. Point is, it was so incredibly stressful. I mean, it was like punching myself in the face constantly. I did a screenplay and I wrote an outline for it. I took a bunch of notes. I took like 28 pages of notes for this nothing of a story that I had in my mind for years. Not in the story, just one like moment, an image, and a premise for the story. And it was kind of semi-autobiographical. And I actually hired the screenwriting consultant, Michael Haig, to do a consultation on it. And I was so obsessed with doing it. I was like, I have to do it. I have to get his feedback because, for one thing, I foolishly thought he would love it. But second of all, I thought he would be able to give me some advice on, what else to do with it. But I also wanted to be very open and not be a conceited jerk. And I'm paying him, and he's the real deal. He's seen 1,000 screenplays, and he's friends with Will Smith and Shane Black, and he knows what he's talking about. And I paid him to look over a 6-step outline of my story and give me feedback on it. He asked me a few questions, and basically he said nothing about it is working. So you have 3 options. You can either quit screenwriting, you can just focus on directing, since you said you want to direct, or you can just rework the whole story. Now, quitting screenwriting, that's not, or focusing on directing, that's not going to work for me. By the way, he was very nice to it the whole day. He was not rude about that at all, even though to even present somebody like that, this story outline, it kind of tries their patience. I can understand that. So it was his advice. I was very thankful. I said thank you. I wrote up follow-up email. I said thank you. It was so helpful. I was touched by your help because I didn't want to be, negative at all. However, I was fucking devastated. I was so humiliated. I was shocked. Afterwards, I wanted to be, a big part of me just wanted to be like, oh, he's wrong. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He can't understand this, right? I mean, I can think of movies I love that he wouldn't have approved of because of the way he says these 6 steps happen in at least blockbuster and critically acclaimed screenplays. And I was trying to think, but I also wanted to think, just wait, let it, just take time. Let me think about this, because I wanted to be like, screw him, I can't do that. I wanted to be mad, but at the same time, I was like, oh, shit, I just take time to accept this. It was really painful. I was like in a daze for like a week. I was like, what happened? Why did he say that? What was going on? I thought he would like it. I thought it was good. After about a week, I started realizing a little bit more clearly, okay, he's got some points. This isn't working. I guess after about a month, I realized, oh shit, he was right. This is not working. But the way I compare my experience learning to write so far, and I'm still very, very new to this, is like the experience of going through boxing training. I took a boxing class for a couple of weeks, and it was a 90-minute class. You could go to it like 5 days a week if you wanted. I think I usually went to it 3 days a week for a month or month and a half or something. And when I took the classes, 90 minutes of boxing and weaving and running, you'll practically throw up, and I did throw up once, and they made me take out the trash when I puked in the trash can. But the first 2 weeks or so, 3 weeks, you're not even worried about getting the technique right and being able to throw your punches correctly and everything. All you're worried about and all your focus should be on is basically trying to remain standing by the end of the class. You are so exhausted. I was soaked through with sweat on my shirt. I wasn't thinking about anything else. Doing all kinds of exercises, and all you're worried about is just remaining standing till the end of the class, because you're so weak, your muscles are so weak, your heart is weak, your lungs aren't strong enough. You can't even focus on thinking you're going to get the right form and being able to, move your body correctly. You have to go through that pain first to learn how to do it. And then after like 3 weeks, I started noticing, okay, I'm worried. I'm actually focusing on my form a little bit. And one of the instructors noticed that. He said like, hey, and I was very quiet. I didn't learn anybody's name there. I was reticent to speak to anybody. I talked to one of the instructors after class. He's like, yeah, you're doing a little better. How you feeling? I said, yeah, I actually feel like I'm starting to work on the technique now and not just standing up. And he knew what I was talking about, because it's just so brutal and relentless. And that's kind of like what I've learned so far in writing is for myself, I had no idea whether I'd be able to make it to the end of that first screenplay. And I actually wrote 90 pages of it, but I had it outlined. I knew what the ending was. I was writing through it like mechanically by that point. It just wasn't good. It was nothing of a story. This little indie drama of a guy who hates where he lives, basically. That's it. And nothing really changes, and it's just a miserable little story. I'm sure it would be a little bit interesting, but that's it. But I also had to get it out of me. And I realized, okay, I've got to tighten up my muscles now for writing. And I was talking to a friend and realizing, okay, how do I incorporate certain things? And what was great about talking to my friend, who's not a screenwriter, not a filmmaker, not sophisticated about storytelling, he had courage just to put out ideas without thinking about it. That's what I love about his sensibility. So he was saying, people love uplifting stories. People, like the underdog who wins stuff in the end, which I didn't have in my movie. And I said, well, how can we incorporate a ticking clock into this? He was just getting me thinking about stuff, at least. I was thinking, there's got to be an element of a ticking clock. Eric Edson, a screenwriting professor and a screenwriter, says all great movies must have an element of a ticking clock, raising stakes, and good news, bad news. And they have to have them in each scene. So the movie can't just go on forever. It has to come to a moment where it resolves itself and where each scene does. There's raising stakes, good news, bad news. Good news, the character got away from the cops. The bad news, the mafia's, waiting for him. Something like that. And you have to have that dynamic, those reversals within the scenes and reversals of entire scenes. And not necessarily 100% hard and fast rule every single time, but it's a great rule to go by, because you don't want to pardon yourself from thinking, oh, I don't need that element in my story. That's a novice mistake. That's a way of excusing yourself, of saying, well, I don't need to do it because I just feel like, you know, I like my story, which was my mistake, so therefore other people will. And by the way, Michael Haig addressed that to me, and he just chopped me down to size. Again, very professionally, very nicely. I respect the hell out of what he did, which he didn't have. It was such an education in 60 minutes. The most painful education will like educate you so quickly. So that was and it was great for me, and I sincerely am thankful for that. Even though now I realize, okay, don't just go out and pay a consultant when you don't have much of a story or experience. Wait until you've written 5 screenplays. Get the experience. That way they have something they can give back to you for feedback. Haig had nothing to say, really, because nothing was working. I mean, he was asking me questions, he was trying to figure things, but he was just saying it wasn't working. There wasn't much to say. So from that experience, I started introducing little elements of like, well, what if the character was this? You know, this sort of element of a ticking clock that's winding down. He has to make a choice between this and this. And then what if this happened? You know, what if this but then this happens that totally foils the character's plans. And anyways, I was making notes on that. Another book, I was looking through John Truby's The Anatomy of Story, 22 Steps of Any Great Story, whatever. Something like that for the subtitle. But that is excellent because it helped me clarify so much. And while I was painfully trying to write notes on my story, it just made me stop. And it's sort of a dense read because it's not like just a fun, you know, book of stories. It's literally breaking down to the point where you can follow along and make notes on, okay, how does each character reflect back a different variation of your central idea of the story or your theme. There are so many little elements like that where you need to have it understood before you write your script and you outline everything. And it was so helpful. It was, you know, a lot to take in, but it made it so much faster. And I know the next story, which I've already got like 8 or 9 other story ideas now I want to write, and I'm going to have to. I know that. I've read the average screenwriter writes 9 or 10 scripts before they sell one, and you know, I'm probably an average screenwriter if I'm going to be one. So I know the next one will come probably even faster, or not necessarily faster, but with a little more clarity. Again, today I was saying I was getting back to writing. It was like punching my way through my own coffin. I took a little time to stop because I realized I hadn't read any screenplays. How can I write if I don't have time to read? So I took the time to read 31 screenplays. I've written down a list of them, and that's at least it was good for me to get started on them. I want to read hundreds, but I don't want to just take all this time to read screenplays. I'm anxious to get started. So I read 31, and it doesn't take long to read screenplays if you're curious, by the way. You can read 2 a day, 3 a day, if you have time for it. But there's a lot of great scripts online too. If you can't find one, by the way, sometimes just look up this, like the name of the movie, screenplay, and then PDF. If you just look up the name of the movie and screenplay, you might not find it, or you might just find a crappy transcript of the movie. But if you want to see the actual thing, sometimes just add PDF when you're Googling it. I read 31 screenplays. I read a few more books, William Martell's Screenwriting Blue Books. I read Secrets of Action Screenwriting, which was excellent, and Hook 'em in 10, which was really helpful. I almost felt like I was procrastinating by reading that last one. Not because of the book at all, but because I thought, well, I've read 31 screenplays now. I read 4 books maybe on screenwriting. Maybe I should at least get started now. I have all these notes on my screenplay. I have an outline for it, although the outline's not very good. It's still rough. By the way, benefit of having an outline, instead of writing your whole screenplay and then rewriting it, cutting it down, have your outline, look at that, and then figure out what you need to change and rewrite that 1-page outline instead of rewriting, say, 140 or 120 page script that just is endless because you didn't plan out everything ahead of time, all the turning points of your story, making sure you have enough conflict, have enough drama, making sure characters go through very bad things. That's something writers are afraid of doing, and it's a novice mistake, and it was something I was worried about doing too, and it's something I have to keep catching myself from doing because it's like, what am I protecting myself from? This is what I want, the thrill of putting this character through the worst hell imaginable for them. It's not like anybody's in the audience is going to think, oh, good thing the writer didn't write anything too daring. No, they're not going to care. You know, they want it laid out in front of them, all that drama. But the Hook 'em in 10 Screenwriting Blue Book from William Martell is about how to get the first 10 pages of your screenplay and the first page and the first lines as interesting as possible, because you have to get the reader's attention when you're submitting a screenplay to anybody. It has to be quick moving, regardless of if you think, and William Martell addresses this, whether older movies started slow. He goes through that and kind of dismantles that notion. It helped me because I knew I was struggling with my opening, and I know the conflict is coming too slow, and why am I so tediously setting everything up and there's not enough story? And I started realizing, okay, this fifth step in my story, move it up to the second. And then I'm thinking, well, wait a minute, why can't I move it up to the first? But then I backtracked. So by that point, I was struggling. I was miserable today. I wanted to scream like, fuck, fuck, fuck. Even now, I don't want to scream it because it's like 3 in the morning and my roommates are asleep. But I definitely didn't want to scream it earlier tonight while they were all awake. But I just wanted to scream, fuck, and just punch my chair. Not this chair. This is hard. My soft recliner over there. But I wanted to punch it like 100 times because I kept getting up and getting away from the computer because I'm like, it's too much. I can't deal with it, trying to come up with this story. Every time I was trying to think of a new point, it was like such an overwhelming feeling. It was like I was going up the first hill of a roller coaster and about to go down thinking, I can't deal with this anticipation. It's too much, too painful. I got to get the fuck off this ride. Can't do it. That's what it felt like. It was so brutal. But when I realized, okay, I finally freed myself up to take this one section of the story where the action really kicks off of the story and move it up, even though I ultimately didn't leave it there, but at least freed me up to realize there's nothing set in stone about this. And I'm definitely not doing the audience any favors by thinking, oh, I can't do that. They're not going to care what I thought I can and can't do. They want to see me do what I thought I couldn't do. So even though I ultimately didn't leave it there because I'm not quite sure if it would work that way, it may very well later, and I definitely like the idea of getting the story, the action kicked off a lot faster. I mean, the action meaning the conflict of where the protagonist and a couple of the antagonists, or the sort of the lower antagonists of the, the lead antagonist figure, attack the protagonist. I moved that up, felt a lot better about it. I might leave it there, or I might put it back there, might not, I don't know. But from there, it was amazing. I didn't want to punch my chair anymore and scream. I wanted to pick up this chair I'm in right now and throw it across the room in celebration. That's how excited I was. It's always so overwhelming. And not only is it so painful and excruciating, but it's also exhilarating. I absolutely love it. It's so exciting. And thank goodness, like that analogy, and thank goodness, like that metaphor with boxing classes, now that I've actually done it once with one script and done it with the notes of this script, I know that it's going to happen and that I shouldn't dread that. And so it doesn't make me as fearful of it. So now it's a little more exhilarating. It's a little more exciting. It's a little more of an experience of growing. And now I have a little bit more clarity of what I'm going through. Whereas, like with boxing, you're not just worried about staying on your feet and making sure you don't cramp up and worrying about your shin splints and the skin on the balls of your feet peeling because you're basically on those for 90 minutes. I was more worried about, I could be more concerned about flexing my muscles a little bit, just a little bit, not much. Because again, this is only my second screenplay. Thankfully, I'm learning. It does take time, but it does happen. It seems like from changing that one part of the story, moving it up and then moving it back and seeing, well, maybe it'll work, maybe not. I got to see. I was able to rework so much more of the story, though, that felt so unclear before. It was just filled with muddled logic. I know what my idea of the story is. I know why I want to tell this. I know why I feel so strongly about it, why I relate to it, why it feels like something that comes from my life and lots of the lives of people around me and tons of people around the country and around the world. But I was able to weave so many more parts of that story into that idea. Whereas before I was struggling. I was just kind of going through this loose fitting story of, a series of events, some kind of slow, some kind of stilted, not really quite sure how I was going to tie everything together. Now I'm feeling much better about that. And I know I've still got quite a long way to go, but I feel better with that script out of the way, with, you know, going through the painful and humiliating experience. My goodness, I felt so humiliated with Michael Haig. And again, not his fault. He did a great job. I'm so glad for that. But I felt humiliated even thanking him, because it felt like I'm saying like, oh, I know I'm a failure, but I'm going to suck up anyways. Like there was no escape from humiliation. And of course he wasn't trying to do that. He even said, I'm not trying to make anybody quit, but that's how brutal it felt. But anyways, now I can look back on it and laugh a little more and say, well, thank goodness I did that. And again, I recommend for writers out there, wait to pay money to get your screenplay criticized and get feedback on it. Write 5 first and really go back to the other ones. Read a lot of screenplays. I've only read 31. I want to read hundreds, so I'm going to be reading a lot more. But once I was able to start really changing things and felt more freed up to change them, to better integrate into my central idea and keep the logic of the story clear, like this happens because of this, and therefore this happens, but this character stops that, and this character wants to change something else because he doesn't think this is work. It made it a lot clearer, and fortunately, from there, I didn't feel that misery. I almost kind of miss it because it felt so familiar, but I didn't feel it at that point. I'm sure it'll come back. But it was nice to not have to want to get up and feel like I want to scream and punch my chair. So now I have other story ideas that I want to work on. And thank goodness, again, I went through that experience of getting critiqued by Michael Haig, because not only did I start working on this screenplay as a result of that consultation, which I feel so much better about than my first screenplay, but I developed this one based on some very small ideas from the first one. One threadbare plot element became the whole story for this other thing, the only vaguely interesting thing. And actually Michael Haig said it was the only thing that, like, maybe you can make a movie about this one element. And I wasn't setting out to do that with this new screenplay, but then I thought it makes perfect sense for this character, or at least it could work very well with this story to infuse drama, infuse a ticking clock, great sense of danger, raising stakes, good news, bad news. So I was very glad to see I could develop a little bit more of a muscle to more strongly carve out a story. But not only that, a few days ago, I came up with another idea that I'm realizing now can bring out more elements from that original story too, that again had nothing much going on in it. It was interesting to me, but now I realize I can pull it from that story, extract it, and put it into this new story I have, but now realize so much more quickly all the elements I need for the movie, that it can't just be this character floating through life, which is what so many novice writers do. It's what I did. And then the mistake I see a lot of novice writers do is they defend it to the death practically. And I absolutely did that too earlier, which stopped me from writing basically, because I thought, well, I don't need to learn to write, you know, I'll just figure it out as I go along. I can improvise things, I can make up a movie with actors, and we can just feel it out as we go along. And I realized I didn't want to learn. I was too arrogant, and as a result I didn't learn anything about writing for many years. And I didn't realize you have to learn this craft. It's not something you just make up as you go along. It's not something you just write out, which I tried my first time. My very first time I sat down writing, I wrote like 13 pages, and at the end of that I realized, whoa, nothing's happened yet. I just have a long series of like 4 characters meeting this main character and introducing them, and these long monologues that I thought were funny because they were like Paul Thomas Anderson, angry characters ranting about stuff, and it would be strange and entertaining at how far this character takes it. But I realized nothing's happening. I was like, oh, I have to learn this. Then I went back and watched a bunch of interviews with writers on the Film Courage YouTube channel, and I read some of their books. I read first one, Eric Edson, The Story Solution, which was excellent. I want to read it again. I read Robert McKee's story, and then I started writing. But then, of course, I mentioned the rest. I went back and I read John Truby's The Anatomy of Story, and I read some of William Martell. I read 3 of his screenwriting blue books. Outlines and Thematics is another really good one. Everybody should outline, except the people who don't need to. But if you don't need to, it's probably because you have it outlined in your head before you start writing. So it came much easier. And now, again, I realize taking that another few threadbare elements from this earlier movie that I did feel strongly about, but I didn't understand how to make it into an actual story with drama, with raising stakes, with a ticking clock, with good news, bad news, with turning points in the story, with key sequences where, you know, the character has to push through, whether it's dealing with an attack by an ally, or dealing with you know, wanting to retreat and quit, or sacrifice themselves, whatever the case. Now I'm realizing so much quicker, okay, I got to figure out who's the antagonist in this one. What's their goal? What's their plan to achieve their goal? How's it going to interfere with the main character? What's the central idea of this story? What do the locations mean? How is each scene going to reflect the story in miniature? How are they going to reflect the themes of the movie? How are they all going to connect to this central idea? And from there, it makes it so much clearer where trying to realize that stuff isn't as painful. Again, like the boxing class, where you're not like trying to stand up and somehow trying to keep your form when you can barely breathe and you can barely hold yourself up. Now I'm a little bit more able to just focus with some clarity on, okay, I already know it needs these things. It's not all formula. It's not going to be the same, you know, exact step every part of the story. But I know I have to answer these questions for myself, for what I feel strongly about this story, to bring it out. And I've heard other writers talk about this, and I feel strongly that you discover the story. It's not something you invent that's new. It's out there waiting to be discovered. These characters, these events, they're waiting to be uncovered. And it's just really exciting, the discovery of that. It's such an exhilarating experience, along with the stress and misery. And I've heard other writers say, if you're not considering quitting writing every week, you're not a writer. Yeah, that's definitely a part of it. But who knew I would ever do this? I never thought I'd be doing this. I thought writing must be the driest, boring, most dull experience ever. And turns out I really love it, in addition to all the other elements of filmmaking that I love. So outline your stories. Writing can be miserable. Again, my title of the video, writing a screenplay is like punching your way out of your own coffin. It's a miserable, broody, what? Broody? Bloody, bare knuckle experience. But you toughen yourself up in so many ways, and you learn so much. And it's been exciting. I really feel like I'm just learning so much that I would never learn any other way. I couldn't do it any other way. So it's just, I didn't know this one, you know, avenue of life would ever be open to me. I had no idea it could exist. And again, it doesn't feel like it's invented. It feels like I'm discovering something. So that's for other writers to connect to and think about. Let me know your comments, what you think about that. Writers, again, don't defend and don't fight your novice mistakes. We all make them. I make them. One of the other mistakes, on top of making the mistakes themselves, is people have reasons for making them where they think like, well, why do I need an antagonist? Yeah, technically there are movies without antagonists. I was thinking about this. Born on the 4th of July, there's no antagonist. Saving Private Ryan, so it seems to be like war movies. I can't remember what other one I was thinking of, but some war movies, even though Born on the 4th of July is really a lot more than just, you know, war in the battlefield. But there's no antagonist in that. However, why would a novice screenwriter say, well, why do you need an antagonist? Can't the protagonist be the protagonist and the antagonist? Which would mean that the antagonist, a character who has their own goal and a plan to get it, and the protagonist, did I say antagonist the first time? The protagonist and antagonist both have goals. They have plans to achieve those goals. The protagonist may realize something's not complete in their life. You know, they have this moral weakness that affects how they treat others, and this psychological need, and something about their life isn't quite complete. Then something changes. They realize they have to set out for this new goal, and maybe they get that, maybe they don't, but then they need to achieve an even greater goal that stems from that, and the physical drama and conflict connects back to the emotional conflict. It can't just be emotional conflict. And those are mistakes novice writers defend, and they say, well, you know, why can't the protagonist be, you know, the antagonist as well? I've heard that from more than one person. And the question every writer should ask themselves is, are you saying that because you've already mastered the craft of screenwriting? You've already mastered how to write a screenplay and have a well-defined protagonist and antagonist? Or are you doing that because it's so daunting to come up with an antagonist as well as the protagonist and keep it centered on one story and not spin off into 5 or 10 different stories and not have a bunch of scenes where there's no turning points, the beginning of the scene is same as the end, where nothing really happens, where there's muddled logic, where the story's not clear? Are you saying that because that's just the easier way and it's extremely hard to come up with an antagonist or come up with a strong protagonist or come up with a clear conflict that starts early on and a clear goal and a clear weakness of the main character, of the protagonist? Because the problem you're facing in your screenplay is not different from that of other novice writers. Also, just not enough conflict. That was my huge problem with my very first 13-page abandoned draft of my first screenplay, because I realized there's no story here. I looked at it and I realized nothing's happening. I thought this would be fun and exciting, but nothing's happening in the story. Everybody struggles with that for whatever reason. That's just how our brains have emerged and from evolution, and that's how we make mistakes when we're grappling to figure out storytelling. So learn the craft, respect the craft. Certainly it can be extremely difficult, but now I'm looking forward to it more, and I'm glad to be getting into it. It's just a great adventure, great learning experience. I never thought this aspect of life would ever be open to me. I never thought I'd be capable of this. I always thought I'd pawn off writing to somebody else. But now I realize I would be incomplete without it. It wouldn't feel sufficient to me. I feel like I got to get this thing out of me. I have to. So it's an exciting hobby, exciting craft, exciting career. So let me know what you think, writers. Talk about your experiences and recommend books. And I'll link to the books that I've read and recommend in the description as well. So like the video, subscribe, comment, favorite, share it with a friend, support me on Patreon, and stay tuned for a lot more. Get notifications too. Press the notification bell because YouTube's all screwed up with their notification system being glitchy lately. All right, thanks again.